The Sad Fairy Tale, the story of a happy little boy named Malcolm. There was once in the country of Owliffe Bay a sad city, the saddest of cities, a city so ruinously sad that it had forgotten its name. It stood by a mournful sea full of glumfish, which were so miserable to eat that they made people belch with melancholy even though the skies were blue. In the north of the sad city stood mighty factories in which, so I'm told, sadness was actually manufactured, packaged, and sent all over the world, which never seemed to get enough of it. Black smoke poured out of the chimneys of the sadness factories and hung over the city like bad news. And in the depths of the city, beyond an old zone of ruined buildings that looked like broken hearts, there lived a happy young fellow named Malcolm. Malcolm was happy in an inexplicable, unbelievable way that defied even the most logical of logical thinking. Everything around him sagged with the melancholy that the sadness factories pumped out daily. In fact, Malcolm had every reason to be the saddest, most melancholy person in the entire unnamed city of sadness. But let's take a closer look at Malcolm's situation. Malcolm was not big. In fact, he was quite small by the standards that accounted for such things. Malcolm was not strong. In fact, he was quite weak, also by the standards that measured such things. Malcolm was not smart. In fact, the standards that measured such things would have considered him dumber than a doornail, which, as I understand it, is quite dumb. Malcolm was not brave. In fact, those very same standards said that he was quite the scaredy cat. Malcolm was not loved. In fact, Malcolm had no family to speak of. His mother and father had both simply wandered away in sadness, not even thinking to demand or even ask that Malcolm join them as they packed their things and left the unnamed city of sadness. Malcolm was as alone in this world as the dictionary definition of being alone. Yet, Malcolm was wonderfully happy. Malcolm lived in what remained of the only home he had ever known. Believe me, it was a wreck of a place. The hole in the roof was just large enough to leak water directly onto little Malcolm's little head every time it rained. He would calmly, as only a deliriously happy child could, move his sleeping bag, for that was all he had to sleep on, a little to the right, only to find that the hole had enlarged just enough from a tree limb caught by the melancholy breeze that always seemed to encircle the sad, unnamed city, snagging in the sad, decaying roof to tear the just large enough hole ever so slightly. Then Malcolm would move the sleeping bag a little to the left, with much the same result. Anyone watching would have noticed just how unbearably depressing Malcolm's life must have been. Yet Malcolm continued to smile through all of it. Each day, as was his custom, Malcolm would begin walking the streets of the sad city, moving with a smile among the sad citizens making their own sad way to the center of town. To each person he saw, Malcolm would greet them, saying, "Good day to you, sir," or "Good day to you, ma'am." Every returned greeting, if greeting is the right word for it, pretty much every time was the same. "What's so good about it, you miserably happy child?" And the good wishes recipient would turn their head downward and humph in the general direction of Malcolm. With each unpleasantness, Malcolm simply rolled his eyes up to the bluest of blue skies and smiled a little more wonderfully. In fact, if I can let you in on a little secret, it was the blue sky that was the secret to Malcolm's joy. The very bluest of blue skies that shone above every single person in this sad, miserable city with no name. The bluest of blue skies was constant in the city, even on rainy days, which, in fact, if I can let you in on another little secret, weren't rainy at all, but instead were merely the moisture from the sadness factories' gray smokestacks, which belched out their daily dosage of misery across the city. Malcolm was happy because the sky he always looked up to and thought about and imagined at all times was the bluest of blue and held the deepest of deep hope for something happier. Malcolm, since he was a small boy with little strength and with little intelligence and with almost no courage and very less love, realized at a very early age that the bluest of blue skies belonged to him and was there for him any time he needed or wanted. In the bluest of blueness, Malcolm found happiness and possibility. And really, that is all a person needs, no matter your size or strength or intelligence or love. But things weren't done for Malcolm just yet. On one particular day, maybe it was a day when the sky was even a bit bluer than normal, I can't be sure of that, but it makes sense if it was, Malcolm met another little impossibly happy child. Her name was Millie, and she too walked the same streets of the same sad and unnamed city. She too was smallish and weakish and dumbish and unlovedness. She too had every logical reason to be more miserable than seemed possible. And yet she wasn't. She too greeted everyone she met with a "Good day to you, sir," or "Good day to you, ma'am." And she too was always met with the same returned greeting, if greeting is the right word for it. "What's so good about it, you miserably happy child?" And the good wishes recipient would turn their head downward and humph in the general direction of Millie. Millie would turn her smiling face skyward and gaze up at the bluest of blue skies and continue on, smiling even more until she greeted the next person. On this particular day, under a particularly ecstatically blue sky, Millie and Malcolm happened to meet on the street and greeted each other. So surprised were they that neither looked up at the sky. There was no need. They had wished each other a good day at exactly the same time, and at exactly the same time each had looked at the other. They each looked and saw the bluest of blue eyes looking back into their own bluest of blue eyes. Neither in the wildest hopefulness of their bluest of blue sky gazing could they have ever imagined the hopeful explosion of possibility that occurred in each of their hearts. No words were exchanged. Malcolm reached out his terribly weak hand and found Millie's terribly weak hand that was also reaching out to him. And so they walked to the city gates under the bluest of blue skies, gazing only at their bluest of blue eyes. The people they passed on their way through the saddest of unnamed cities stepped aside to let the young pair pass. A strange behavior, to be sure. As Malcolm and Millie passed these normally grumpy and quite unhappy people, each one of these miserable beings felt the same odd and unfamiliar tug on their miserable melancholy hearts. That tug was something unfelt for a very long time. It was the tug caused by the hope for a possibility, a little something beyond and out of what they now thought of as normal life. It wasn't much, but it was a little something, and maybe, just maybe, it could be enough.